Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for animals. On today's episode, PETA's focus on horse racing. Getting attention now with a lawsuit on behalf of a bettor, a gambler, who feels the game is rigged when horses are commonly abused and medicated on race day.
We believe this is a landmark case because if every bettor who bet on a race where it was found that a horse had been illegally drugged, there could be hundreds or thousands of lawsuits. And if the rules and the public outcry and the exposés that we have done about drugging aren't going to stop the illegal doping of horses, maybe 1,000 lawsuits will.
PETA Senior Vice President Emil Guillermo, who is heading up the campaign, and yes, Ms. Guillermo is my wife of 30 years. We'll talk about PETA's efforts to end the abuse in racing today on the PETA Podcast. But first, we hope you've enjoyed our program so far. We began with PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk in Episode 1, who talked about her controversial comment about rats, pigs, dogs, boys, you know that one. Listen to Ingrid on Episode 1. She also talks about no-kill shelters. Check out that and all our links to previous episodes on our podcast player on PETA.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. And because we are really just beginning, don't forget to check us out on iTunes. Please rate and review. It helps spread the word that PETA has a podcast talking about the issues you care about. So in this episode, they call it the sport of kings, but in the modern day, it's really the sport of drug-dispensing vets and trainers. Horse racing, where the horses are just vehicles for pharmaceuticals that get them down the track. But now PETA has filed a lawsuit in New Jersey on behalf of a bettor who claims the use of drugs means that racing is rigged. PETA's Emil Guillermo says the suit is part of PETA's campaign to end the abuse of horses in racing. She says were it not for seeing a horse break down in the 2008 Kentucky Derby, there never would have been a campaign. Here's my interview with PETA Senior Vice President Emil Guillermo.
We never actually wanted to have a horse racing campaign. This was something that came up unexpectedly in 2008. A beautiful filly named 8 Bells crossed the finish line and immediately fell down. And it turned out both her front ankles broke after she crossed that finish line. And she was euthanized right there on the track. And I was watching that race that day. And it seemed to me that there were things that could be done to make horse racing so much more humane than it is today even. And this is something that we could help with.
Let's talk about what this involves, the PETA's horse racing campaign. What does it mean?
We looked at what causes the most suffering among horses. And this turned out to be several things that are easily fixable. First of all, there is the drugging of horses. I think most people have heard that horses are occasionally illegally doped with substances such as frog venom or...
Frog venom?
Believe it or not. I mean, the ingenuity of people in racing really, to some degree, is unbelievable. They keep coming up with new things that they can dope horses with. And illegal doping is recognized and is condemned. But I think what fewer people realize, trainers and veterinarians use legal medications to keep horses running when they should be recuperating from strain and injury. And this overuse of legal medication is what leads to the breakdown and the deaths of horses on racetracks. There are statistics showing that more than 3 horses die every single day on racetracks in America.
And so what does PETA hope to do? You're trying to make horse racing better?
Well, horse racing has been in trouble for a number of years. I think its survival is in question. But we believe that at the very least, The owners and the trainers and the veterinarians and all the people involved need to take responsibility for making it much more humane than it is now. They need to stop the drugging. They need to provide horses with a more natural life. They need to stop the claiming, which is the sales of horses on tracks right after the races. And they need to stop selling them at auction, and they need to stop sending them to slaughter in Canada and Mexico.
So this is a kind of maybe an incremental improvement. There's a lot of people who maybe would rather be on the fringe calling for the abolition, but you're actually moving toward racing, trying to make some changes, making it better, and then ultimately leading to maybe the end of racing?
Well, the bottom line is that anytime there is a sport, or so-called sport, or an activity that involves animals that is done for profit, the animals suffer. And the bottom line on that is that we're opposed to all of that use of animals. That said, we have worked very hard to make things better for horses in racing because it's not going away immediately, and there are simple things that could be done to make life so much more pleasant, so much less cruel for the horses involved.
And so is this an idea that can bring about change quickly, or let's put it this way, what is the goal of the campaign?
Our first goal is to stop the slaughter of horses and to get the drugs and the misuse of medication out of racing, because those two things cause the most suffering among the animals in this so-called sport. So if we can do that, we will have made life so much better for thoroughbreds and standardbreds in this country.
All right, thoroughbreds being the horses that race in the Kentucky Derby. Standardbreds are more like the harness races.
That's right. The thoroughbreds are the horses that people see on TV in May every year, and for the Triple Crown races, those three big races that are the ones most people are familiar with. And standardbreds are trotters and pacers used in harness racing, and you rarely see that on TV anymore. There aren't as many standardbred tracks as there are thoroughbred tracks.
Recently, PETA was involved in a lawsuit filed against horse racing. Tell us about that suit, because that's part of the campaign too, right?
Yes, just recently, a bettor, a man named Jeffrey Tretter from Illinois, filed suit against a trainer in New Jersey, alleging that because that trainer had reportedly given a horse an illegal substance, and then the horse later won the race, that his losses for betting were due to that illegal doping of the horse. This is a groundbreaking lawsuit. I mean, we know that if federal officials investigated horse racing and found that trainers had given horses illegal medications, they could prosecute them under racketeering charges and fraud charges because of the interstate gambling that goes on with horse racing. So we reasoned, why couldn't a bettor, a gambler who places money, and let's face it, it's the gamblers that keep racing alive, why couldn't a gambler file a private suit for those charges? The horse in question was a trotting horse. His name is Tag Up and Go, and it was discovered that a little bit before a race in January of 2016, he had been given an illegal substance called EPO. And EPO is a substance that causes overproduction of red blood cells. It's strictly banned in racing. And the horses that Mr. Tretter had bet on to place first through fourth came in second through fifth because this doped horse came in first. And so this bettor filed a lawsuit in New Jersey against the trainer and against the owners for racketeering and fraud because the horse was doped. And we believe this is a landmark case because if every bettor who bet on a race where it was found that a horse had been illegally drugged, there could be hundreds or thousands of lawsuits. And if the rules and the public outcry and the exposés that we have done about drugging aren't going to stop the illegal doping of horses, maybe 1,000 lawsuits will.
Yeah, this is one of the things. I must confess that I was a horse racing enthusiast before I met you. And then, of course, we got married, and the rest is history, as they say. And I've changed my ways. But this lawsuit it appears to me, goes directly to the integrity of the game. Because why would anyone want to bet or put good money on a race that essentially was rigged? I mean, that's really what this is saying, that the doping essentially means a race is rigged. And so my question is, why didn't any better come before this fellow in Illinois to challenge this? Because it seems that the bettors are always the last ones involved in the equation to try to stop or reform racing. They'll take the bettors' money, but it's called the sport of kings, not the sport of the bettors.
That's right. And when horses are found to have been illegally drugged or found to have been under the influence of illegal medication illegally after a race, when the blood samples and the urine samples are taken, what will happen is that the order of the winning horses may be changed. The purse or the winning money that goes to the owner may be redistributed, but there's no redress for the bettor. So that's exactly right. The bettor has no say in what happens, and he's just out that money. He or she is just out that money. And so that's right. I think that when bettors stand up and say, wait a minute, we are part of this, and what you're doing is not only inhumane, it's unfair, and it's illegal, we want to say in this, I think that will be very difficult for trainers and owners to ignore.
Well, this also goes straight to the core of how they actually make betting or this kind of gambling legal in America, because they say, well, this is a skill game, number one, and number two, they say it's parimutuel betting. It's betting. Bettors are actually putting their money in a pool, and they're playing against each other, and so because of that, the state is just essentially just handling the money and giving and distributing the bets, but then, as this lawsuit tries to point out, hey, what about the people who cheat on the inside, who are giving drugs to horses, running lame horses and putting them out there as well horses who can run when they can't run? If you put down $2 on a horse that's lame, you're being cheated.
That's right. You're being cheated, and from our perspective, the horse is being cheated, because I think the life of a horse used in racing from beginning to end in many cases is just miserable. They're trained and raced as early as 2, long before their bones are even completely formed. They may be sold multiple times throughout their so-called career. There is not a single person who is devoted or responsible for that horse throughout the horse's entire life. They may have 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different owners. They may go to the track one day with one person and go home that night with another. They have no access to the outdoors in many cases. They live their entire lives from the age of 2 until they're out of racing inside a stall or on the racetrack. And because of the medication, because their bodies are broken down, because they're given anti-inflammatory drugs, muscle relaxers, all kinds of medications, rather than allowing their bodies to heal, by the time they're 6 or 7 years old, they may be arthritic, which is unbelievable because horses can live to be 30 or more. So to be arthritic and broken down just after they're physically mature is a great tragedy. So I think if you look at what happens with a horse from beginning to end, and often the end is at auction, and the end can be being shipped to a slaughterhouse in Canada or Mexico. I think we have to say the bettors, but most particularly the horses, are getting the worst end of the deal.
But this suit, it sounds like, could be a real breakthrough that might really lead to the end of horse racing.
I don't know that it will lead to the end of horse racing. What we wanted to do is to lead to the end of the abuse of the horses used in racing. We wanted to lead to the end of medication. There was a time a few decades ago when there might be 1 or 2 veterinarians for an entire track. And now if you go to a racetrack, there may be 10 or 12 on that one track, because the medication is used so frequently. And what this means to a horse is that, let's say a horse goes out and trains runs around the track and might be a little bit sore, or the horse is raced and may find that the trainer may find that he's a little bit weary and needs to rest, or he has a little bit of muscle strain. What we wanted to do is end the use of medication and illegal drugs. That's really what is so easy that could be done tomorrow. If everybody in every one of the 38 states where horse racing occurs would stop over-medicating these horses, if they would allow them to train and race and then recuperate and spend some time out in a pasture rather than being medicated with 5 or 6 different kinds of drugs in a week and then put back on the track for a race, that would make life so much better for the horses. And that's really what I think this suit could do by worrying trainers and owners what will happen if they're not careful.
Now, already you've gotten some response. The media response has generally been pretty widespread in sports pages, on the news sections, horse racing trades. But you have some detractors, some people who say it's not going to fly, it's never going to amount to anything, the bettor's not going to get his money back, and the suit will be thrown out. I mean, there's been some criticism from insiders. Is that daunting to PETA?
Oh, well, if we were daunted by opposition, we'd never get anything done. The truth is there's a mountain that needs to be moved, and I think we can move it. And I think if we did move it and we did make things better for horses, then trainers and owners and everyone would be much happier. But I think what we have seen so far is a great deal of support from the gamblers themselves. And there are people within racing who would like to see things improved and who would like to see the horses treated better than they are. Already, the horse racing industry, since we began our campaign, has started a retirement program, or what they call the Aftercare Alliance for thoroughbreds, which means that horses don't always go straight from the track to auction and slaughter now. They have a chance at a decent life, and this program is, at the moment, it's run very well, and we've been very impressed to see that horses have a life after racing, or they can have. Improvements can be made. There's a piece of federal legislation right now, the Horse Racing Integrity Act, that would put a private agency in charge of oversight of medication use. And this would be one federal oversight method of regulating medication. Right now, every state in which horse racing occurs, every one of the 38 states in which horse racing takes place has its own set of rules. And it varies from state to state. And if there's a violation in one state, the trainer can just go to another state and begin racing there. It's not always transferable from one state to another when there's been a violation and a suspension or a fine. So we're seeing things begin to budge a little bit. It just needs to happen much quicker to spare the horses.
So is horse racing the new states' rights issue, or is there going to be a federalization of horse racing? Is that sort of what we have to look forward to?
I think many in racing hope that there will be. They know that the way things are now, it's not sustainable. So many people in racing are looking for a way to see that the playing field is level. And many people in racing are looking toward a day when they don't feel that they have to medicate horses just to remain competitive. Of course, from our perspective, they have the power right now. They could decide right now they're going to ban this use of medication, they're going to ban the doping, they're going to have meaningful penalties and not the slap on the wrist that people get now for doping horses. They could decide this immediately and things would be better next week, but they're very reluctant to change.
Well, it's sad when the breeders and the trainers see a level playing field means that there's an acceptable level of doping allowed versus a complete ban.
It is so frustrating to see how the racing industry looks at medication. There is a veterinarian who said once, and this has always stuck with me, horse race is not a diagnosis. And she meant by that horses shouldn't just be medicated because that's what racing involves. It didn't always used to be that way. It shouldn't be that way now. And a horse who is used in racing should not have to look forward to 6 or 7 different injections in a week just to prepare him for the race that's coming up on Saturday.
All right, let's move on to another area. You've done some investigations already in the horse racing campaign, including a high profile eyewitness investigation of trainer Steve Asmussen, who, despite being, I would say, more than dinged by this investigation, he went on to still be in the Racing Hall of Fame very recently. I mean, so tell me about the investigation and how you feel about it in the aftermath.
We took a look inside the training stable of Steve Asmussen, who at the time of our investigation was the most successful trainer, the highest money-winning trainer in America, and also, I might add, the trainer with the most drugging violations of any in America. And what we did was document on video what we knew to be true from listening to so many people who called us, so many whistleblowers in racing who talk about the use of medication and how injured horses are being forced to run. We documented that horses were receiving medications on such a regular daily basis or every other day that when they had an injury, when a horse had a foot that was sore, for example, the horse was not allowed to rest. There was no time for recuperation. It was medicate them up and get them back out. And we took this information public. It did cause a huge controversy within racing. Many people came forward to denounce it. Many people came forward to defend Mr. Asmussen. I think that what we showed on video, though, it's hard to argue with. There were medications used to keep horses running who should never have been on a track. And that's exactly what leads to the breakdown and death. And as a result of this investigation, Asmussen was fined $10,000 for violating racing rules, medication rules in the state of New York. And New York also introduced what they themselves called sweeping new regulations to try to deal with this medication issue. The legislation, the Horse Racing Integrity Act, was introduced in Congress as a direct result of this investigation because the Jockey Club, which registers all thoroughbred foals and is really the only body that touches all areas of thoroughbred racing, got behind it and said enough is enough. You know, we've now seen on video what happened. It's horrifying. Let's see if we can get federal legislation enacted.
So there were changes. There were some laws that came out of this.
There were some changes in New York State. The federal legislation is still pending, and we've seen a number of racetracks take some pretty significant steps to try to prevent the drugging. The Stronach Group, which owns Santa Anita Racetrack and Gulfstream, and Pimlico and some other tracks around the country, particularly stepped up. And they put, for example, cameras in the barns so that it could be monitored and they could see if somebody was over-medicating or illegally drugging a horse. We saw some other things come out of this too. I think, first of all, it put it in the public consciousness, and that was very important. And we began hearing from multiple whistleblowers within the racing industry. And I mean people who have worked on the track and currently work on the track, who see things that upset them, and then they get in touch with us and they tell them. And we have been able to go then to the track owners and say, we understand this is going on. And what can you do about it? For example, horses who shouldn't be run because there's an injury that's being hidden. And we've seen tracks take action to protect these horses.
And yet, even with all that, all to the good, the industry or portions or segments of the industry rallied around Asmussen. You would think that a guy like Asmussen would have been run out of the industry after the investigation. But no, he was honored as to be included in racing's Hall of Fame. Not Hall of Shame, Hall of Fame.
Well, racing is its own worst enemy. You know, the people in racing should do exactly what you just said. They should look at the people who have embarrassed them and who have hurt horses, and they should deal with it properly by getting these people out of racing. But instead, they circle their wagons around them and they say, really, you've mischaracterized it, everything is fine. And that's ultimately what will lead to the end of racing. It's not what PETA does with a camera in a barn somewhere. What will lead to the end of racing will be the people in racing who won't admit that they're causing suffering for horses. And I have to say, a few years ago, there was a report that was done for the Jockey Club that took a look at the state of racing. Now, the Jockey Club paid, I believe, $1 million to get this report, and it took a comprehensive look at the state of racing in America. And one of the reasons it found that people are not coming to racing anymore, the young people are not going to the racetrack, young people are not betting, and this is a problem for the racing industry. And the number one reason for that is the perception among the public that horse racing is cruel. So until racing understands that their cruelty is going to kill it, they're in trouble.
And then it not only is it cruel, but the race is rigged. If there's doping involved, then that speaks to the suit that was recently filed. It sounds like you've got racing on the ropes.
Well, they better pay attention. That's what I would say. I would say that every trainer in America should pay attention to this lawsuit and should be prepared to stop doing what they're doing. And it's going to take some brave people to stand up and say, all right, it is unfair if I don't medicate my horse like other people are, but I'm going to take the high road and I'm going to do it right. And trainers need to stop being in charge of racing, first of all. Trainers are setting the standards here, and they need to be removed from that role. I think owners could do it, and I think tracks can do it, and I think they can stop what's going on that hurts horses.
And so, as a final question, incidentally, people can go to YouTube and see the video of the PETA investigation. They can also go to PETA.org. But as a final question, what does racing need to do or to make it more humane? And is there hope in your mind?
I'm not sure if there's hope. I know exactly what racing needs to do. And it needs to start with the breeding. They need to be looking at what they're doing and stop breeding horses who have problems. They need to breed fewer thoroughbreds and standardbreds in America. They need to race them later when their bodies are more physically mature. They need to stop medicating and drugging them. They need to clean up the claiming game so that horses can't be traded around and offloaded. And they need to make sure that horses aren't broken down before they're 6 or 7 years old, that the horses are still in good condition, and they need to make sure that horses have a home to go after racing. They need to stop drugging and medicating horses. These are pretty straightforward and easy things to deal with, but it's going to take everybody in horse racing to agree that they need to do it, and then they just need to do it. I have never seen a group of people talk so much and do so little. The fix that they need is there. And if they don't do it, then I don't know what will happen, because I think the public is not going to support racing as long as horses are dying.
Kathy Guillermo, Senior Vice President at PETA, on the campaign to end the abuse of horses in racing. Check out the links on this podcast page for more information on the bettors lawsuit, the Asmussen investigation, and more. Or you can also search for them at PETA.org. And again, Kathy Guillermo is my wife of 30 years, and she knows exactly why we pronounce our name Guillermo. And that's it for our show. Hey, you can contact us at PETA.org. Don't forget to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. It'll help us reach more people and let them know why it's important to speak out and take action for the animals. Our music, incidentally, is provided by Carbon Works. If you like it, hey, check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.